Net neutrality. Is it alive in 2019? We're going to take our time as we prepare for this webinar and let people have a moment to join and listen. Absolutely. You are here for the No Justice Without Net Neutrality webinar presented by Voices for Internet Freedom Coalition. My name's Collette Watson, and I'm going to introduce my fellow participants here, the panel. But before I do that, I just want to give a little bit more time for DJ Erin Shields to kick off the webinar with our Halloween themed music, because today is Halloween and people are still joining the webinar. So let's take a few more seconds. Oh yeah, that's the stuff. In case you didn't know, you are watching No Justice Without Net Neutrality. DJ Erin is lacing the webinar with Halloween beats because today is Halloween. But we're taking a moment just to let people join. So if you're out there and you have joined, let us know in the comments where you're watching from and why you care about net neutrality. My name is Collette Watson. I'm with Free Press. Today is Halloween, and we know that net neutrality is undead, and we're here to talk about why that matters. I'm still enjoying the music, but I guess we should go ahead and maybe get started. Hopefully people are with us. So real quick before I introduce the panelists, again, you're watching the No Justice Without Net Neutrality webinar presented by Voices for Internet Freedom Coalition. And who is that? Well, Voices is a coalition of organizations that are centering low-income people and communities of color in the fight for digital civil rights. We've been around for quite a while now, almost 10 years, y'all. We're getting old. And the organizations that we represent are MediaJustice, National Hispanic Media Coalition, Free Press, other folks who are not on this panel, 18 Million Rising, Color of Change, just an incredible coalition of groups that are fighting at the intersection of racial justice and digital civil rights. So if you're here today to talk with us, make sure you let us know in the comments. I already see some people chiming in. We've got someone watching from Los Angeles. Alex is with us from upstate New York. Hey, Alex, let us know where you're watching from, and make sure that you're posting on social media too and using that hashtag digital civil rights. So again, thank you for joining us. And now I want to kick it to the panelists. Tell us who you are and why you care about this issue.
I can start.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Erin Shields. I'm the National Field Organizer for Internet Rights at MediaJustice. And I care about this issue because outside of my work at MediaJustice, I'm an organizer. I work locally in DC, and I've seen how powerful the internet has been in the last 5 years even in bringing people together and really supercharging movements. And we know that a lot of times corporate media isn't telling the full story of our communities. And so the internet has played a powerful tool in bypassing that gatekeeper and really allowing people to speak for themselves about what they care about, what their communities look like, and what our communities need. And so losing the essential right of net neutrality is devastating, and that's why I continue to fight and why I'm really excited to be here to talk about what's next for net neutrality.
Fantastic. Thank you, Erin. Let's have Daiquiri.
Hey everyone, my name is Daiquiri Ryan and I represent the National Hispanic Media Coalition. NHMC is a 30-year-old civil rights organization that focuses on empowering and fighting for digital rights for the Latinx community. And I personally care about net neutrality because as a Latina, stories that get told about Latinas in particular are almost never accurate. They're not told by us. And so the open internet really gives us an opportunity to tell stories about us, by us, and to us.
Absolutely. And Joe?
Yeah, I need a second to change into my costume for a second, Collette. Right? You give me a second. You give me 1 second.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
gonna
Take
join
your
the
time.
party. I'm gonna. This is really hard, so I'm gonna become the Invisible Man for 2 seconds, and then I'll come back. Okay. So Invisible Man. Okay. I'll as it's visible. This is my Invisible Man costume. Okay. So I'll be back in a second. But I'm back and taking off my costume. But I want to say net neutrality. I want to say net neutrality is critically important for me. I'll come back and speak. So there you go. That was really hard to get it out of. So
Wow, where'd you go, Joe?
yeah, that's a pretty amazing costume. I won't tell you where I got it from, but it's like for me, net neutrality is critically important because it's about narrative. Narrative in this country has been it's been weaponized against communities of color, and other marginalized communities in order to uphold a white racial hierarchy. It is tough to adopt policies. It is tough to carry out injustices, whether it is slavery, the annexation of the Southwest, the taking of native lands, to everything you see what's happening today. The we call it the kidnapping of children on the border, right? We can list so many, right? It's tough to do it without a narrative that dehumanizes people to a point where you can actually carry forth these policies. And so net neutrality is a way to, for this generation of folks to be able to challenge the narrative. And that's something that people of color have been doing for the past 200 years with media. And the internet is the latest iteration of this fight. Net neutrality is the latest iteration of does our media system allow the greatest number of people to be able to participate and speak for themselves, or does it concentrate power in the hands of a few? So that's why I'm here talking today. And thanks for allowing me to costume change. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, honestly, today is Halloween. We're all in costume, but I think you might win, Joe, because Invisible Man was pretty dope. So, Joe, you've been fighting on this issue, I think, for at least 15 years. Like, we all definitely appreciate your leadership. But I know there are some people on the call right with us who maybe are newer to the fight. And I want to make sure that we're all on the same page with just what is net neutrality. So I'm going to ask you and Erin to talk a little bit about that. But before I do, I want to shout out some of the people who are here. Mary from Reno, Nevada, also Indivisible, Northern Nevada, says that net neutrality is critical to democracy. Francine in Northville, Michigan says they care about people needing access to evaluate information independently and thoroughly. Amber is checking in from NYC, and Francine has asked us to speak more loudly. So let's all try to do that, panelists. Pasadena is in the house. DC is in the house. This is amazing, y'all. Thank you for being here on Halloween to talk with us about net neutrality and what's next. So Erin, what in the world is net neutrality?
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad you asked. Net neutrality can seem a little bit spooky. It kind of feels a little bit technical at times. When it's stripped down to its basics, net neutrality is a rule that helps us all be able to engage on the internet in a way that is fair and is equitable and takes control out of corporations' hands and really puts it onto the platform as a way for us to utilize the platform in a way that's fair. So it covers 3 basic rules. No blocking. So no blocking sites. If the content is legal, we should be able to see it. No throttling, no slowing down speeds, and no paid prioritization. So corporations should not be able to pay for fast lanes to serve their content faster than somebody who maybe has a blog or somebody who is streaming from a protest. And so we want to make sure that those rules really stay in place. And there are other smaller things, other side things maybe people will bring up here that can really strengthen those 3 rules, but those are the basics when you bring it down to its core. Joe, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'll just say that for me, and I just, in the historical context for a second, the idea, like whenever a media system is created, whenever technology comes along and creates new media systems, there's a role the government to play to determine, do we allow the greatest number of voices to participate in the news system, or do we concentrate control in the hands of a few? Whether it was the creation of the printing press and then the rise of newspapers in this country, to the telegraph, to radio, to television, to cable television, the government, especially when it comes to radio, television, and cable, decided to concentrate control of these mediums in the hands of a few. Now, the internet was created as a platform, an open platform for everyone to be able to participate in and not be discriminated against those companies that allow you to connect to the internet. And so this fight here, what we're fighting, is the latest iteration to determine whether government adopts policies to allow the greatest number of voices to participate. And this is what the fight is. It's a historical struggle. So when we fight to democratize radio, fight to democratize television, it is the same fight. We want our voices to be heard and included, but with the internet is different. It's the lowest barrier of entry for people to be able to have a voice. You don't have to have a lot of money to buy a radio station or television station. And so, as Erin is saying, this is what the latest fight is. Can we allow the ISPs, Comcast, the world, AT&T, obviously wants to concentrate control on to themselves to control who's able to speak, and who can connect to them. And so this is a critical racial justice issue, as we've already touched upon a little bit, because for our communities, we don't own these stations, radio and television stations, and the internet is the lowest barriers to entry for us to be able to connect with other people. That's what I say.
And I think that really flows into, I think, what we're going to talk about today. And I think a lot of us have been working on this issue for quite some time, and the recent court decision was messaged to us as really being a total win for ISPs and really knocking the wind out of the fight that a lot of us on this call, a lot of the participants, people watching here and on Facebook, sort of knocking the wind out of our sails. But it makes me think, actually, in context with what Joe shared about this being a fundamental right, Miriam Kaba, who's a really famous organizer and educator, often when engaging in struggles like this, long, protracted struggles, talks about when you're dealt sort of something that doesn't feel like a total win, to really let this radicalize you versus leading you into despair. Let this lead you deeper into the fight versus, making you disengage, because we literally, our communities literally cannot afford, as in we cannot afford fast lanes. We can't afford to go back or to go into a internet or a media framework where our voices are, whether or not we're able to speak is based on how much money we have or how much clout we have with already established media makers. And so what Joe said really brought that up for me.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you mentioned Miriam Kaba. Twitter, she's prison culture. I follow and get so much from her. And that message of we can't afford to go back, I think is definitely one of the main points I want people to take from today. Yes, it's been a long struggle, and that is just, as that lets us know how very, very meaningful it is. I think Lori, who is in the comments right now, put it well. Lori said they're checking in from cold northern Arizona, and you don't have to look far to see the power of net neutrality. Idle No More, Arab Spring, Standing Rock, just to name a few airdropped movements. Very dope, Loris. Thank you so much for checking in. Let's see, we got Marta from Pasadena. Just so many people that are here with us on Halloween. And we thank you for joining us for this special edition, of a net neutrality webinar. We want to check in, though. We know that many of you have stories, personal stories, right, of how you've been able to sustain yourself, fight for justice, made money, build community, see yourself reflected. All of that is so vital to life, especially for communities of color. So tell us about it. Tell us in the comments, or jump on Twitter and tweet. How has the open internet allowed you to do things that you would have never been able to do via mainstream channels? And when you post your story, please include the hashtag digital civil rights so we can see it and we can share in that conversation and even amplify your voice. So thank you so much for tuning in. Please keep talking back to us in the comments. Atang is here from DC. Amber is checking in. You know, just so many great people are in the conversation with us. So let's get down to the nitty gritty, y'all. A court decision came down recently, and there's been a lot of talk about it, a lot of messaging. But before we even get into messaging, what did the court say, Daiquiri?
Awesome. Thank you, Collette. So as many of you are familiar with, the FCC repealed net neutrality in 2017. And so a number of public interest groups, civil rights groups, including the organization I represent, NHMC, filed suit against the FCC for that repeal. And that was in the DC Circuit Court. It sounds like a lot of brujeria, which means witchcraft, but I'm here to break it down for you. So, unfortunately, the decision that came down feels like a trick. On October 2nd, the DC Circuit Court released their opinion and unfortunately upheld a majority of the FCC's repeal. So this means that the classification of broadband under Title I stands. And so some of you may be absolute net neutrality experts and you know what that means, but let me break it down for anyone who doesn't. So Title I under the Communications Act really just means that companies who provide the internet service don't have to follow as many regulations. They don't have as many requirements to meet. And under Title II, which for organizations and for people who believe in real net neutrality, that has to happen under Title II, because under Title II, companies are required to do a number of things that protect consumers from things that are harmful. And so that's right now, as it stands, because of this court's decision, we are seeing net neutrality under Title I. So it has no teeth, there's really no protections, there's no net neutrality. But it's not all a trick. There's also a couple treats. So the court, when they came down with this decision, they upheld the repeal on something called Chevron deference. And that basically means that any agency, including the FCC in this case, has the power and the knowledge to make decisions as they please, as long as they follow a certain process, a certain step. And so this is a good news. This is a treat, because if we wanted to reverse net neutrality in the future, or the same way that we have established net neutrality in the past, the legal authority is still there. So say 2020, something magical happens, we see a Democrat in the White House, we also could see a Democratic FCC chairman appointed, and thus could see net neutrality reinstated. So lots of opportunities there for 2020. Another treat, the court also struck down the FCC's attempt to preempt or override state net neutrality laws. So this means now the laws that already exist in states like New York and California, but also any of the other 48 states who want to enact state net neutrality legislation can do so, and they can also enforce it. This is going to be a big headache for the ISPs, of course, right? If every one of the 50 states has a different version of net neutrality. But it really leaves a lot of opportunities for our side of the fight in 2020. And the last treat that I'll talk about today with the decision is that the court remanded, which means they sent it back down to the FCC, 3 pieces of the order. Basically, they said the FCC did not adequately consider the effect of the reclassification of broadband for public safety, for the Lifeline program, and for pole attachments. A lot of the groups, I know all of us here on this webinar today, in addition to being net neutrality advocates, we're also advocates for programs like Lifeline that close the digital divide. But in order to do that, they have to be able to have broadband service offered within their programs. And so this really means that it's a treat in the sense that there's a lot of opportunity for good things to happen, for broadband to still be included in these programs that help close the digital divide. But we're kind of just waiting for the FCC to act. All of these treats kind of work together as we move into 2020 to see how exactly we can work to restore net neutrality and, in this case, close the digital divide. That's all I got.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Daiquiri. There's so much that you just shared that leaves room for optimism, right? Even as we understand that this fight has been going on for a while, we also understand that it's winnable based on some of the things that you just shared. What gives you the most optimism at the moment, right? We know things are changing every day in the world and in the landscape, but what gives you the most optimism sort of out of what came down in the court decision?
Yeah, so I really think that the court decided correctly in the sense of allowing states to have their own net neutrality laws, because we know that this is like a really hot local issue at the grassroots. As everyday Americans, over 80%, regardless of which side of political ideology you're on, you support net neutrality, you want net neutrality protections. So I really think this is something that in 2020 we can see across the United States. And it's a little fun as an activist, right, to be able to kind of go back to the grassroots and do something a little more locally. So that's what I'm excited about.
Absolutely. And I think too, that's a great thing for people who are listening and watching to keep in mind in terms of optimism. 9 states have already passed their own net neutrality legislation, and something like, I think 30 states are considering legislation now, and we'll revisit that now that this decision has come out that really says the FCC can't stop you. And so I think I got that right. Y'all correct me if I'm wrong with those numbers, but I'm like you, Daiquiri. I'm really excited by that. Folks who are in the chat and watching right now, talk to us about what the landscape is in your state for net neutrality and maybe some of the action that you've been taking to influence that. As you're talking to us, I want to respond. Francine asked us about the court case and kind of, where you can go and research more about this. I just dropped a link into our chat here on Zoom. If you're watching via Facebook, someone from our team will magically make that link appear in the comments so that you can click through and see kind of our statement about that and be able to use the name of the court case and things like that to do your own research. So definitely though, as we keep it moving, I want to remind everyone to talk to us about why this issue matters to you and make sure that you're sharing it with that hashtag digital civil rights. I like what you had to say about tricks or treats, Daiquiri. I'm gonna keep that going. I'm gonna keep the hot hand going. And one message that's out there is ISPs, internet service providers, like Comcast and Verizon. I imagine that they are sitting around in their boardroom with the evil laugh, you know what I mean? And thinking of this as like some kind of a victory where they defeated all of us activists out here and internet users, but it's just not the case, right? ISPs are claiming the court decision as a complete and total win. Is that a trick or treat, Erin?
It's a trick, as you would imagine. I think ISPs are incredibly incentivized to claim this as a total win, to say that the movement for net neutrality has been destroyed, that there's no reason to fight on anymore. And I think what Daiquiri brought up and what you were sort of talking about, Collette, there's a wide open door for us now. So the decision actually opened the door for states to move forward with their own rules. More than 30 states have introduced legislation. 9 have passed already. Most notably, probably California is the one that most people have known about. And many more will come back to their legislation and really, with even more intention, start passing these bills. And I think also it's a little bit easier for people in their respective states to reach out to their local legislators. You may know someone, know people, or be able to go to your state capital a little bit easier than you might be able to fly to DC to lobby your congressional member here. And so my question for those watching are, do you know whether your state has legislation that was introduced? Was it passed? And are there ways for you to take action locally? Can you commit to making a call? If you don't know whether legislation has been passed in your state, can you call your local representative's office and just ask and let them know what net neutrality means to you? And maybe even share, like Collette has been saying today, share what the internet has meant to you and how it has helped you, bring in that extra income or share your art with a larger circle, connect with family and friends who may be across different and far away borders. Be out in your community sharing what's happening when it comes to social issues. Really share those thoughts with your local and federal, really, but local legislators, and see if there's a way for them to introduce, strengthen, or push forward state legislation. So the trick is that ISPs want us to feel down, but the treat is that we have a lot of power. The power will always and forever remain with the people, and we can do this by pushing it forward in the states.
Absolutely. And mic drop. I just want to say, Erin, the work that MediaJustice and others did in California to, get that legislation passed. I think Color of Change did a lot with that too, so inspiring. ISPs really tried to come in at the last second and water down that legislation. Say it again, Erin.
I said they tried it.
They tried it, but they did not prevail because that legislation, some people have referred to as a gold standard in terms of just really protecting the open internet. Again, though, these ISPs are out here trying to message this as a win. Joe, what do you say about that? Trick or treat?
Well, it's a trick for the reasons why Daiquiri also laid out that the fact that the court had the court exactly endorsed the legal rationale for the FCC in this decision. It had, but it gave him deference to make that decision out of just historical precedent, which means, as Daiquiri is saying, just to repeat what she said already, that something we can change it. We did it one time before, all right. In 2015, we were able to pressure the Obama administration, who weren't willing participants for a long time in one of the past Title II protections, to actually pass it. And so we can get it back at the FCC. And also too, last year there was a resolution of disapproval that passed actually the Senate to overturn the FCC's decision to strip the rules. And so that was a resolution of disapproval, just a straight up and down vote in the Senate, where because Democrats are not in the majority, there were a few Republicans who actually voted with the Democrats to overturn what the FCC did. In the House earlier this year, there's legislation, Save the Internet Act, that actually passed the House and is sitting dormant in the Senate. Senate rules makes it harder to overturn because you have to get, break the filibuster. But we believe in the majority senators would vote for it, right? If it was a straight up and down vote. And the other thing is why it's a trick. The treat is that despite their trickery, these companies say two things often. They say they support net neutrality. They try to market themselves as supporters of net neutrality when it's complete bogus. And as Erin, I believe, was saying, the vast majority of U.S. citizens support net neutrality despite the disinformation campaigns these companies are rolling out. And we learned, over 80% of Republicans, Democrats, Independents support net neutrality. And then the other thing, the trickery that the companies were doing, where we found out recently from a BuzzFeed article that they were submitting fake net neutrality comments into the docket, through Broadband for America, a front group for the broadband industry, but despite all the disinformation campaign, the public is still with us. The public still seeing right through this. And so we got to keep it up. And if we have that kind of level of support, regardless of party affiliation, we can change this. We've done it already one time, we can do it again.
That's right. Thank you, Joe. I mean, isn't it telling though that people like ISPs and others who are against net neutrality have to use trickery, right? Like whether it be fake comments in the docket at the Federal Communications Commission or other sort of chicanery that's been out there.
Or they promote themselves as pro-net neutrality. They try to co-opt the actual meaning of net neutrality, and despite the vastness of their wealth, and to be able to try to communicate that message in a broad way, it didn't work.
And I think, Collette, to your point, how it's sad and it's infuriating that they're using this trickery. I think that really exhibits how actual net neutrality serves the most people, and this repeal actually serves a really small amount of people. It's in the best interest of like 5 companies, right? So they have to do that. They can't drum up support, genuine support for this, because when you break down the pieces of net neutrality to people, it doesn't make sense that Comcast or Verizon should be able to have editorial, oversight over the internet. It doesn't make sense that they should be able to institute fast lanes and slow lanes for people that they should be able to throttle, right? And that if a site is legal, that we shouldn't have to pay for additional access to it, right? So I think that really highlights and lifts up the fact that net neutrality, real net neutrality that is based in Title II, is on the side of the people. And, like what Joe was saying, because of the overwhelming support that we see for this outside of Capitol Hill, the walls of Capitol Hill, I think folks know that intuitively, right? And so, I just wanted to share, like, when we have these conversations, we're like, why are corporations doing this? Why are they acting like this? And you have to think, like, Comcast and Verizon did not pour millions and millions of dollars, lobbying dollars, into this to not make money, to not make more money, right? Even though they'll say, like, we're not planning on changing the internet at all. We don't want to institute any new changes. We just don't want the rules to be there. You have to think about why. Why did you why did you flood California State's capital with lobbyists? Why are you all over Capitol Hill on this issue if you don't plan any changes at all, right? So just putting that out there.
Put it out there. Listen, it's so real. The trickery is real, but the victory is on the way. Did that kind of rhyme? Anyway, I want to just thank all of y'all for unpacking that. And I want to also shout out back to Francine. Let us know if we're loud enough, and others, if you can hear us speaking clearly, because Erin, Daiquiri, and Joe are dropping gems right now. So Marta asked us to maybe explain again about the misinformation. We're loud enough. Okay, great. Thanks, Marta. Marta asked us to explain again about the misinformation regarding net neutrality. And I want to actually kick it to Daiquiri, because there's a variety of misinformation, right? So one thing is that ISPs are claiming this as a total win, when in fact courts have said, well, actually states can come up with their own net neutrality protections, and the FCC can in the future, come back again with a rock solid net neutrality protection for us. So that's some of the misinformation in terms of ISPs saying that the issue is dead. It's not. Halloween, it's undead, right? But there's another type of misinformation that's happening from our lawmakers, right? You're probably gonna hear about bipartisan legislation, which is where I want to bring you in, Daiquiri, because to me, the only reason you would need bipartisan legislation would be if this were in fact a partisan issue. But I think Erin mentioned earlier, outside of DC, right, which only like 2 people have checked in from DC in our chat, outside of DC, this is not a partisan issue. This is not about Democrats versus Republicans. University of Maryland released a poll, and others have released studies that show that more than 80%, more than 86% of people who identify as both Republicans and Democrats, as well as independent, are in favor of the original net neutrality protections that we had. So if that's the case, why do we need bipartisan legislation? What is that really about? Is it a trick or treat, Daiquiri?
So bipartisan legislation is a trick. Last year, as Joe mentioned, we had a CRA pass the Senate with bipartisan support. We had 2 or 3 Republican senators vote with us that we really, it was a long shot to get them on this because of the lobbying that these ISPs are doing. And so they have a number of talking points that they will say, no, we're for net neutrality. We really love net neutrality. Why are they coming at us like this? And it's because they will pretend that it's net neutrality, but it's under Title I, like I mentioned earlier. So you can make a bill like Ranking Member Walden has done that says, oh, here's net neutrality under Title I of the Communications Act. And really, it's just a disguise because there's no way to enforce it. That law could pass and it would get to the FCC and there's nothing that they can do to actually enforce it under Title I. Contrary to that, we also have the Save the Net Act. The Save the Net Act is this version, this congressional version, right? So the 116th Congress, that's our version of net neutrality. It restores a 2015 open internet order that most of our groups, if not all of our groups, for sure on this call, all of our groups see as the golden standard of net neutrality because it's under Title II. But there's a lot of pushback. This has already passed the House, you know. That's something that we did earlier this year. A lot of the groups on here worked hard, and it passed with a lot of support in the House, and it's now sitting in the Senate. But we do hear still about these bipartisan working groups in the Senate, and they're not working on net neutrality. They're really not, and that's just the cold hard truth. These are two senators that have historically not been behind net neutrality, will not publicly come out and say which way or not, but when it comes down to voting, they won't vote for it. And so that's another trick that you're gonna hear. Oh, well, you know, in the Senate, they're not gonna vote on this Save the Net Act because they're coming up with their own bipartisan legislation in the working group. It's not net neutrality, don't fall for it. But the treat is that the Save the Net Act, real net neutrality, is still pending in the Senate. Right now, we're still up against the same barrier that we've been on since earlier this year, and it's just that McConnell will not bring it to the floor. And so, as you know, as we always kind of say, feel free to contact your senators, particularly your senators, your members of Congress, of course, at the local and state level, but your federal senators, because that is where the Save the Net bill is right now. But it's more than that. If you know, we need to do more than just phone calls at this point because we're running out of time. And for this to carry on into 2020, we really need you to tell your story. We need you to say, this is why net neutrality matters, because that's what they want to hear. These senators, if you just say, this is why I like net neutrality, it's what they're hearing from both sides, right? But if you go in and you're like, my livelihood literally was built on the open internet and will continue to hinge on that, then we might be able to get them to listen.
1,000% yes. Thank you, Daiquiri. And some folks are already sharing stories right here in this webinar. I want to lift up Mary Richardson, who shared that Indivisible became indivisible through the internet. Starting as a Google Doc that went viral, the guide has created a movement that has protected and informed voters, amplified legislation and administration actions that needed to be called out. They've put hundreds of thousands of people peacefully in the streets. Mary, that is such a great story. And I want to challenge you, Mary Richardson. Can you go to whatever social platform you might use? If you don't use any, great, more power to you. But if you use any, share that story and add the hashtag digital civil rights. And if you really want to be extra funky with it, shout out to my costume. I'm a 70s funkster / activist person. I don't know. But if you want to be really extra funky with it, at your legislator, at your senator, and let them know, tag your senator and let them know your story. Be sharing this story. And I want to share that same challenge with everyone that's listening. So in fact, in case you didn't know what you're listening to, in case you joined us late, this is a webinar called No Justice Without Net Neutrality, because each of us on this call have engaged in fights for racial justice, economic justice, gender justice, and also been able to actualize ourselves, our stories, and our destinies using the open internet. Because of that, we know that net neutrality is a fight worth fighting and continuing to fight until it is won. A court decision came down recently, and we're discussing, why that court decision leaves a lot of room for victory. And by we, I'm referring to Voices for Internet Freedom. My name's Collette Watson with Free Press. We have Erin Shields with MediaJustice, Joseph Torres also with Free Press, and Daiquiri Ryan representing National Hispanic Media Coalition. So real quick, before we go, we've got about 20 minutes. I see folks are continuing to talk to us here in the comments. Hope that you're doing the same on Facebook. Please share those stories. And I'm gonna share mine real quick. And then I'm going to ask you panelists to share yours. My story about my personal stake, right, in the open internet and fighting for net neutrality is that it's really allowed me to find and use my creative voice in a way that before the open internet, I would never have been able to do via mainstream channels. You know, I couldn't go up and knock on the door at NBC or knock on the door at Atlantic Records and say, you know, hey, put my music out. But via MySpace, I reached out, just dated myself. I reached out to a music festival and was able to get my first booking as a singer back in 10 years ago. We're not gonna say the year. And I was able to get booked for a festival in Atlanta, and then from there go and open for Lauryn Hill and Boyz II Men and different things like that, and just really become like a musician, you know, and be independent. And as y'all know, the internet has made that reality for so many independent artists, musicians, other types of indie filmmakers, writers, authors, poets. You know, so many people have been able to start their careers, go viral, and just really be able to sustain themselves and tell our stories, especially as people of color, religious minorities, women, LGBTQ community. You know, our stories get told the wrong way a lot of times, as Daiquiri mentioned, in ways that dehumanize us. But with the open internet, I was able to lift my voice. I've been able to do just a lot via music, and I even have a podcast now. And this is the kind of stuff that nobody would have been checking for 20 years ago because I wouldn't have had a platform, right? So I'm gonna keep fighting for the internet. I wanna ask you panelists, you know, what's sort of the reason that net neutrality is particularly important to you and to our communities that we represent, as humans here on this call? We're human beings too, right? What is so important about this fight to you? I'll start with Joseph.
Yeah, for me, it's personally important because as I mentioned before, the idea of telling, to me, the net neutrality is about power at the end of the day. Do we have the power to shape a narrative that can effectively advocate for the health and well-being of our communities? We struggle with narrative in this country. I mean, I had a colleague who said recently, Donald Trump is a cultural organizer at his best. He knows how to use narrative, and he's tapping into historical racist narrative that is the narrative of the United States, right? To be able to shift the policies he wants to do, to be able to adopt the policies he wants to do that's based on cruelty and harming the other in order to further his political gains, right? And so, to me, and often when I get news and information, I kind of view activists as decline. It was happening in journalism and the less and less journalists out there because of consolidation and the struggling news industry. I view activists oftentimes as performing journalistic duties. I learned so much about what's happening in my communities. I'm Puerto Rican, and what's happening in Puerto Rico from my own community. I'm not hearing it from the mainstream press. I'm hearing from activists who are actually working on the issues. And so often activists are they are storytellers by nature of using the internet, which is the media platform. They're telling a truth that the world needs to know. And to me, that is an act of journalism. I'm a former journalist, but that's an act of journalism. Be able to provide news and information to people that they need in order to function in society, right? And so often I turn to my community to learn about what's happening in my community, because if I throw on the news networks, or read the papers, I'm not going to get that, you know? And so, and at the end of the day, what can we do in the sharing of this information to collectively build power? To build power to actually change stuff. And I'll just say the last thing to tap, while we're hopeful, we can actually win back net neutrality, we got to remember, we got to hold the Democrats and the Republicans accountable. Democrats too. These companies have a lot of pockets, deep pockets, and there was a time, we had presidential candidates who were big supporters of net neutrality. There was a time when Democrats were among, and that's not long ago, a few years ago, were among those leading the charge to kill net neutrality. So it's because of activism, it's because of the narrative that we were able to put out there, the truth about what was happening, what net neutrality is about, that folks are able to hold those in power accountable. You know, and so I'll just stop there. I can go on and on, but I'll just stop there.
Thank you so much, Joe. I want to ask now, Daiquiri, what would you say is really the meaning and importance of this fight?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I talked a little bit about the Latinx community and being able to tell our own stories about us and in an empowering way instead of this like really inaccurate representation we normally get. But I think also like if we think about the last couple of years for the Latinx community, the community's been under attack. I mean, this year, literally the Latinx community has been targeted for mass murder. And so that is something that is devastating, but because of the open internet, not this year, but in the past, we have been able to tell stories about that, turn that pain into stories and movements. And so personally, for me, like as a Latina lawyer, I feel like the open internet gives me the opportunity and the platform to take these like really complicated legalese or policy things and bring them to the masses and to help fuel movements and empower activists by being able to break that down. Without the open internet, I mean, at any point in time, my internet could be slowed down. My connection could be blocked completely. I will not be able to talk to anybody that I want to communicate this stuff to. And that's just the scary reality, not to continue with the puns too hard, but it is scary. Like the fact that no matter how hard I work at this point, if someone at AT&T has a vendetta against me, or if I'm speaking out too loudly against something they support, they can literally just cut me off. And there's no way for me to address that, to appeal that.
And Lord knows we don't trust, Comcast, Verizon, AT&T, internet service provider companies, Cox. Did I say Comcast? Can't say Comcast enough, to make those decisions, regarding our voices. Absolutely. Erin, Joe, I'm sorry.
Real quick, I just want to point out that these companies, we know, for instance, right now, these companies have the legal right. If they wanted to block a website, they legally can. Right now, if they want to go out and block a website, they legally can. Yeah, they have they don't like your site, they can block it from people accessing it. It's totally legal now under the law. Two, we know that these companies want to discriminate online against content because they told themselves, they said it in their own words. When they were asked in court, in a court case a few years ago, Verizon, by a judge, is your intention to actually block websites, block web traffic? Verizon said it's no different than a newspaper editor. Like that's like a newspaper editor gets to pick and choose what to publish. They have the same right they have the same right when it comes to accessing content online. So this is clearly their goal. And it is for maximizing profit, right? Because you have companies like Comcast that own a lot of content, right? And so why not favor their own content over others? Or, and they may do it in very sneaky ways and disguise it in different ways in which to give them like political cover and a lot of different schemes. But this is their intent. It is very clear. This is what they want. They wouldn't fight for this if this is not what they were wanting to do. So, I just wanted to say that's some more trickery. So,
yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Joe. I think that's basically spot on. We have to understand the real intentions here of net neutrality and its opponents, the real intentions of opponents of net neutrality. Angela in the comments had a question. Angela said, I don't get it. Shouldn't there be a national standard for our internet? Why should states be allowed different terms? We already have TV broadcaster stations that are controlling the flow of information. Shouldn't what is the truth in California also be the truth everywhere else, and so on? Angela, fam, you're asking the $1 million question. Truth is a whole other conversation. We would have to have another webinar about that in these times. But you're right. There should be federal sort of oversight and standardization here. But I want to start up the theme song for the person who's standing in the way of that. Obviously, my DJ skills are subpar. There we go. There is someone at the FCC named Ajit Pai. the chairman of the FCC and the majority. But they decided that we didn't need protection as internet users from these ISPs. All right, I'm doing too much, but you get what I'm saying here. The FCC, is not doing its job. And so that is why you have states coming in and saying, we're going to come up with our own rules and try to protect the people that we can. So as long as there is this power vacuum, right, of the FCC not doing its job, not protecting people, not protecting consumers from these mega telecom corporations and what they want to do, in terms of what Joe just described, and picking and choosing winners and losers on the internet, as long as the FCC isn't doing its job, folks will be trying to find other ways to have those protections. And so, we are glad that states are stepping in. We're glad that attorney generals are suing. We're glad that so much is happening because ultimately we want those protections. But we know that the biggest problem here is that the FCC is not doing its job. Joe mentioned in the comments that once the FCC stripped net neutrality rules in 2017, states had to step in to protect internet users. So this is where we are. But why is it so important, Erin, that folks are stepping in? What's at stake here?
Yeah. So at MediaJustice, we approach net neutrality through the frame of, net neutrality is about protecting our civil rights in a digital age. And, something that's personal to me is that Black women are among some of the fastest growing group of female entrepreneurs, and our ability to connect to the internet helps boost our economic power. I think if you know and love a Black woman, there's likely somebody that that is using the internet to get a little more cash on the side. Whether that is, popping up a small shop where they can take a limited amount of orders or providing some other service online. These are the ways that our communities have gotten around, have both, responded to economic oppression and gotten around the ways that our communities have been historically marginalized in the employment sector. So when we're being served and given poverty wages or wages that are not livable, people have used the internet to be able to gather a little extra income, maybe put food on the table. Maybe it's as central as putting food on the table, or maybe it's taking your first vacation that you've been able to take in many years. Just being able to collect and really have control and be empowered to make your own money has been a really powerful outcome of the internet. And on a personal note, an even more personal note, the way that I really entered into organizing was through the internet. I was radicalized after the non-indictment of George Zimmerman for the killing of Trayvon Martin. I was looking for a political home, somewhere that I could, sharpen my analysis around these issues. And I found BYP 100, which is a member of MediaJustice, through digital actions they were doing online at the time. This is like way back in the day, right? And I was able to follow along with the protests that were happening at Standing Rock, the protests that were happening in Ferguson, in Baltimore, the work that is happening on the border right now, what's happening across the globe right now. I mean, if you turn on the television, we're seeing bits and pieces of some of the uprisings that are happening around the globe, whether that's in Haiti or Chile or anywhere across Hong Kong, across the globe, right? And I am personally able to learn and sharpen my analysis by listening directly to the organizers who are working on the grounds in those areas and not have it filtered through sort of a corporate lens. And so really this is like very personal to me in my fight for a more liberated world, to be able to have access and direct communication with people. And if Comcast doesn't like that, they can cut that off whenever they'd like, right? And I don't want them to have that ability. I don't think that, ISPs are among some of the most hated corporations in the country, the most untrusted corporations in the country, and that's for good reason. And I really take it personally that they have moved in this way to block something that has been so fundamental and pivotal in my life, which is, having access to all of these different movements and being able to connect.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Erin. And the list of reasons why there's so much at stake goes on and on and on. You know, beyond my musical life, I was able to, when I got interested in figuring out how to become an activist, I was able to find Black Alliance for Just Immigration, or BAJI, and get involved. Just a few weeks ago, we attended a town hall and I got to meet a disability rights advocate named Maria Town, who told me about how the open internet has allowed her to be able to meet other people who have her specific disability. And so that when she goes to see a doctor and they say to her, no, what you're saying makes no sense, she can say, no, absolutely it does. And there are other people who experience it too. Because of the community she's been able to build online. We know that for LGBTQ youth, you know, that the internet has been incredibly important in helping people to find and build community and acceptance and love and family at a time when, you know, their own community may be very, very toxic and violent for them, and be able to survive in that way. So what we're fighting for with net neutrality, it's not about dollars and cents to us the way that it is for our opponents at the ISPs and maybe even in Congress, some of them. You know, it's really for us about our lives. It's about digital civil rights. So, you know, thank you so much to everyone. We've just got about 3 minutes left, I think, until our wrap time. Thank you so much, though, to everyone who has tuned in. And I hope that you will continue to share your stories. Like right now, in fact, I'm going to say right now, stop, take a moment, open up Twitter if you use it, and share just a few sentences about why the open internet, how the open internet has been used by you to sustain yourself, to fight for justice, and use that hashtag digital civil rights so that we can see it and we can amplify you and share these stories. Because we at our organizations, we're going to be talking to the FCC and talking to lawmakers at the federal level as well as at the state level, and we can share these stories. You know, we can make sure that they understand what's really at stake and why it's not a partisan issue, it's not a money issue, it's a democracy issue, it's a civil rights issue, and it's a human issue. I want to thank each of you panelists, Erin Shields, Joseph Torres, Daiquiri Ryan, representing MediaJustice, Free Press, and National Hispanic Media Coalition, which are all organizational partners in the Voices for Internet Freedom Coalition. If you want to learn about that coalition, which I see people in the comments kind of thanking us, go to internetvoices.org, because there's a lot of spooky shit that we're fighting against when it comes to our ability to control our information, to be able to use our voices and tell our stories as communities of color, as people living on low incomes, as people just trying to survive. So I want to thank again everyone who is watching and encourage you to share your stories. Remember this, if you don't remember anything else from today, on this Halloween, net neutrality is undead and the fight continues. Share your story with the hashtag digital civil rights, and together we will win. Any